My name is Jasmine Wells. I was 31 years old when my mother called me selfish at her own dinner table, in front of every member of our extended family, while the lights above her head were shining because of my credit card. I had spent the previous 12 months paying her electric bill, her gas bill, her water bill, and her internet package. I had stayed awake in my apartment in Milwaukee on cold nights, checking weather forecasts for Madison, and wondering whether my parents' house still had heat. I had calculated, because calculating things is what I do for a living, that the total came to $6,143. That number did not include the emergency reconnection fees, the late charges, or the cost of the second job I picked up on weekends to make sure I had enough left over for my own rent after I finished covering theirs. I work as an energy efficiency specialist. I analyze how large buildings, hospitals, office complexes, municipal facilities consume power, and I identify where that power is being wasted. I am very good at reading a set of numbers and locating the drain before anyone else has noticed it. It is a particular kind of irony that I spent a year doing this professionally while completely failing to apply it to my own life. The evening started with a blue ceramic bowl. I had made it myself in a pottery class that weekend, glazed it in soft blue, because my mother had always said that blue made a house feel calm and peaceful. I wrapped it carefully and brought it to dinner along with the hope, unreasonable as it turned out, that something might be different this time. When I walked through the door, my mother Ruth gave me the kind of hug that doesn't quite make contact and whispered immediately into my ear, asking whether I had remembered the login for the utility account because the gas company had sent another warning notice. That was my greeting. Not how was the drive, not you look tired, not thank you for everything, just the account login and the gas company's warning notice. I put the bowl on the kitchen counter behind some store-bought pies and said nothing. My father looked up from his chair and said, "Oh, you're here," in the tone of someone acknowledging a pizza delivery. My brother Alex made a joke about big city money arriving. Ruth pulled me aside before I could take off my coat and asked me not to mention the bills at dinner because it would make the family look bad. She didn't mind that I was paying them. She just didn't want anyone to see her accepting the payments. It had begun the previous winter, at 10:43 on a Tuesday night. I know the exact time because I was sitting at my own kitchen table with my laptop open, working on an energy audit for a hospital client, when my phone lit up with my mother's name. Her voice on the other end was small and slightly ashamed, the way it always was at the beginning before she learned that the shame was not necessary, because I would pay regardless. She said the power company was going to disconnect them. She said they just needed a little help until my father's retirement payments were recalculated. I asked how much. She said $480. I paid it within 10 minutes and did not ask why Alex, who lived 15 minutes from their house, was not contributing. I told myself this is what a good daughter does. Then it was the gas bill, then the water. Then Ruth decided the internet was essential because her church meetings had moved online, and my father needed streaming access for his health. Each call began the same way, with that small, slightly ashamed voice, and each ended the same way, with a transfer and a promise that it was just temporary. By spring, I had started keeping records, not out of resentment at that point, but because I am someone who finds it easier to look at numbers and feelings. Electric bills totaling $1,842. Gas totaling $1,376. Water, $711. Internet and phone, $1,119. Emergency reconnection fees, on top of all of it. What I also kept, because something in me understood it would eventually matter, were the messages. The text where Ruth told me to pay the bill, without telling my father, because he would be embarrassed. The voicemail where she explained that Alex had children to think about, but I only had myself. The message where she said Alex told her I made good money, so she didn't understand why I was being difficult. Sent on a month when I had paid her gas bill 4 days earlier. I saved the recordings and the screenshots and the images of the paper bills she photographed and texted me. I kept them in a folder on my phone, and I did not show them to anyone. I kept them because I knew that one day my family would rearrange the story, and I wanted to have the original version available. At dinner that evening, before Ruth made her comment, I sat and listened to her tell the table what a wonderful son Alex was for fixing a squeaky door hinge. I listened to my father say that Alex always showed up when they called. I listened to Alex complain about his own financial pressures and remark that people who live alone, the way I did, don't have real responsibilities. I held my fork and thought about my rent and my student loans and my car insurance and the weekend job and the $6,000 and the late nights checking the weather in Madison. I thought about all of it and I said nothing, because saying nothing was what I had been trained to do. Then Ruth smiled her wide public smile and told the table that Jasmine had done well for herself, but was simply too selfish to do more for her family. Every fork went still. My father looked at his plate. Alex made the small, mean sound he makes when someone else is about to be embarrassed, and he wants credit for not being the one who caused it. Ruth held the smile, pleased with the performance of it, confident in the audience she had cultivated. I looked up at the light fixture above her head. I thought about the 11 months of payments that had kept it on. Then I looked at my mother and told her she would definitely notice how selfish I was when all those lights went out. The smile left her face as though a switch had been thrown. Alex called me classy. Ruth said this was not the time. My father continued studying his chicken, and something in me that had been bending in one direction for a very long time straightened itself out, quietly and completely, the way a circuit breaker resets. I put my phone on the table. I told him that I was finished being called loving when I was given the money and selfish when I indicated I might stop. Ruth said we could discuss it privately later. I told her that since the insult had been public, the response would be public as well. Then I opened my folder and began reading. I read the text message asking me to pay the bill without telling my father. I played the voicemail in which Ruth's voice explained that Alex had children, but I only had myself. I showed the message calling me difficult, sent days after a payment she had already received. Alex's expression changed as each item was presented. He asked if I was really going to do this, and I told him yes, and kept going. The room went a particular kind of quiet that happens when people realize they are hearing something they were not supposed to hear. My father looked up, finally, and said that Ruth had told him I was only helping with small things occasionally. I looked at him and told him I had kept him warm all winter and kept his lights on and had not embarrassed him for it, because I had handled it privately, and that the person who had now embarrassed everyone was a person who called me selfish at her own table. Ruth said I was humiliating her. I said I had protected her in private, and she had chosen to humiliate me in public, and I was simply correcting the record. Alex stood up and said nobody had forced me to pay anything. I agreed. I told him nobody forced me. They had simply trained me to believe that love meant absorbing whatever was asked of me without complaint. My Aunt Linda suggested everyone needed to calm down. I told her that staying calm and staying quiet was precisely how the situation had reached this point without anyone acknowledging it. Ruth shifted into a different mode then, the one where she becomes a person who sacrificed everything. She began listing what she had given up for me over the years. I asked her whether she had actually sacrificed those things, or whether she had decided to list them now, because her preferred version of our family was falling apart in front of company. Ruth put her hand on her chest. She said she was the one who held everything together. I asked who she called when the house was about to go dark. She didn't answer. Alex said $6,000 wasn't that much money for someone in my position, so I showed her more. The Thanksgiving grocery money I had transferred quietly. The prescription costs I had covered while he was purchasing a new outdoor grill. The school fundraiser donations made in my name without anyone asking me first. Then I mentioned something that changed the temperature of the room more than anything else had. Megan, Alex's wife, had also been messaging me. She had sent her own requests, her own urgent explanations, her own assurances that the children couldn't be in a cold house. She had used the same language, the same rhythm, the same pressure. I told them they had all used the same system, just from different angles. Ruth used guilt. My father used silence. Alex used his children. And I had kept paying, because I had confused being needed with being loved. My father looked diminished. He looked like a man encountering a version of events that should have been visible to him for years, and was only now arriving. Ruth looked frightened. Not of poverty, I understood, but of losing the story she had been telling everyone about what kind of family we were, and who played which role in it. I picked up my glass for the last time. I told them that beginning that night, my name and payment information were coming off every account. I was changing all the passwords. If they needed financial assistance going forward, they were welcome to show me a real budget and make a real request. And I would consider it the way any adult considers a genuine ask for help, with information and with respect. The emergency service was closed. Ruth asked if I would really let them sit in the dark. I told her I wasn't the one who had ignored the bills for months. I was the one who was stopping the automatic rescue, which was a different thing entirely. Then phones around the table began to buzz. The family group chat had received messages from people in the room, and now people outside it were responding, asking whether it was true that I had been covering everything. Ruth watched her careful construction of our family's reputation dissolve in real time across the screens of people she had spent years performing for. She told me to delete the messages. I told her no. Alex grabbed his coat. Ruth didn't want him to leave. His children were loud in the other room, and for the first time, I did not stand up to go and help manage the situation. I folded my napkin and stayed in my chair. It was such a small thing, staying seated, folding a napkin, and it seemed to unsettle Alex more than anything I had said. Then my phone showed an email notification I had been waiting weeks for, a job offer, a senior position in Chicago, significantly better compensation, relocation included. I looked at it for a moment, and then I told the table I had gotten the job and would be moving. Ruth told me not to make a major life decision while I was upset. I told her I had made this decision long before tonight. Tonight had simply confirmed it was correct. My father said they were proud of me. I asked him honestly whether he was proud or whether he was worried about losing reliable access to me. He didn't answer that either. Ruth asked, finally, the question that told me everything I still needed to know. She did not ask whether I was all right. She did not ask what she could do to repair things between us. She asked what they were supposed to do about the bills. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said quietly, there it is. She started crying and said she hadn't meant it that way, but we both knew she had. The room began to empty as relatives found reasons to leave. Nobody wanted to be the last person sitting in what the evening had become. I went to the kitchen counter and picked up my blue bowl. Ruth said it was her gift. I told her she hadn't opened it, so it wasn't hers yet. I walked out to my car and sat in the driveway in the cold, and I logged into every account and removed my payment details one by one. Through the window, I could see them moving around inside, arguing in a way families argue when the thing holding them together has just walked out to the driveway. Ruth came out without a coat. She stood in the cold and apologized. A real apology, smaller and less practiced than her usual performances, which made it more credible. She said she was sorry for making me carry so much. My father came out behind her and said he should have asked more questions. Even Alex, inside, was told by Ruth to be quiet, which was the first time I had ever heard her say that to him. I told her I forgave her enough not to carry hatred with me to Chicago. I did not tell her it was enough to go back to the way things had been, because it was not, and it never would be. I gave her a brief hug, not a surrender, but a release, and got in my car and drove away. A few weeks later, I was in my new apartment in Chicago. I put the blue bowl on my kitchen table and filled it with oranges. Ruth sent me a photograph of a utility bill she had paid herself. Just a picture, no caption. I looked at it for a while, and then I smiled, not with satisfaction exactly, but with the particular relief of someone who has finally located the source of the drain and closed it off. I had spent a year finding inefficiencies in other people's buildings. It turned out the largest one in my life had been the assumption that being useful to people was the same as being loved by them. Once I understood the difference, everything became much simpler. The bowl looked good on the table. The city outside my window was lit up in every direction. I had paid for none of it, and all of it was mine.